when a 13-year-old black girl stepped onto the stage of the citywide math competition. The entire auditorium burst out laughing. No one believed she could possibly do anything meaningful, not because she wasn't intelligent, but because she was her. That day, the grand stage was lit up brightly. Hundreds of students sat neatly below, white shirts, ties, pleated skirts, a formal atmosphere. When her name was called, Kendra Johnson, contestant number 47, a tiny girl, thin, wearing thick glasses, stepped out. And then the first sound was not applause, it was laughter. A group of boys in the front row chuckled. A judge let out a sigh. A parent whispered, "I don't understand how she made it to the final round." Kendra looked at no one. She simply walked forward, placed her hand on the digital board, and waited for the question to appear. Her hand trembled, but her eyes did not. Then the problem appeared, and the entire auditorium fell silent. It wasn't a simple question. It was a three-dimensional system of equations modeling a problem that NASA had abandoned back in 2019. One judge frowned, glancing at the screen again. Another murmured this problem isn't meant for high school students, but while everyone was still stunned, that black girl began to write, fast, precise, clean, without a sound. But every stroke of her marker exploded into the room full of doubt. The entire audience froze. A professor tilted his head toward the board and muttered, "What is this girl doing?" But to understand why this girl dared to do what no one expected, we need to go back to a place rarely noticed on the map, the southern edge of Detroit, an old neighborhood where buses don't stop after 10 p.m., where kids cross through rubble to get to school, where Kendra grew up. She studied at a small public school, Lincoln Middle School, no projector, no science lab. The library consisted of old books from decades ago. And yet, Kendra's math scores were always among the highest. She applied for the advanced math class and was rejected. We don't think she has the foundational knowledge. This class is only for students with exceptional abilities. They said that without even looking her in the eye. No one asked how she studied. No one knew that every night she secretly watched NASA videos online, wrote equations with a marker on the old bathroom mirror. When Kendra entered the waiting room for the city-level math competition, she was the only contestant wearing a faded school uniform. The rest wore expensive dresses, crisp white shirts, smartwatches, and backpacks bearing logos from prestigious schools. Bradley Weston, the previous year's champion, glanced at Kendra, then whispered to his friends. She probably got in for diversity points. Laughter erupted. No one stopped them. No one spoke up for her. The entire room seemed to silently agree on one thing. This girl wasn't one of them. She wasn't well prepared. She didn't have a private tutor. She didn't come from a school with cool air conditioning and MIT-trained advisors. And when the loudspeaker called each contestant, the audience clapped rhythmically. But when Kendra's name was called, only a few scattered claps, then silence. But Kendra didn't quit. She still walked onto the stage, didn't look at anyone, didn't apologize for her presence. She simply stood there. And when the final round math problem appeared, a problem that NASA had once failed to solve, no one answered. Only that girl stood up and began to do what no one dared to do. She requested to change the entire frame of reference. She didn't raise her voice, didn't argue, didn't proclaim she was smart. She simply let her words and her writing speak for her. And from that moment, the ones who had laughed at her fell silent, and the system itself began to tremble. The final problem was projected. The whole room held its breath. This wasn't a question meant for high schoolers. It was a variation of the problem that caused the failure of NASA's Drift 9 satellite mission. a problem that had baffled dozens of scientists due to undetectable errors in curved space. Bradley looked at the question, then crossed his arms. He smirked. No one touched their pen. Everyone knew this was the unsolvable question, and then the announcer's voice rang out. Contestant number 47, Kendra Johnson, you may begin. Kendra didn't sit down, didn't rush to grab her marker. She raised her hand clearly and firmly and said, I would like to request to change the coordinate system. Laughter burst out. A judge scoffed. A parent shook their head, whispering, does this girl think she's at NASA or something? But Kendra didn't laugh, didn't hesitate, didn't change her mind. The head judge, Professor Reynolds, frowned. Oh, miss, this is a math competition, not a space research lab. You're not allowed to change the problem. Kendra replied, her voice soft but steady. I'm not changing the problem. I'm simply reframing the question the way it should have been framed from the start. This problem assumes constant gravity, but the given data contradicts that. A female judge, Dr. Sandra Wu, leaned down to examine Kendra's drawing. She whispered, as if not believing her eyes, this girl is reversing the entire Euclidean logic, and it makes sense. Professor Reynolds growled. There's no room for fabrication here. Kendra didn't respond. She turned back to the board and began to write. The first line, the second, a new coordinate system, 3 layers of spatial twist, a compensatory oscillation method, something never taught in any classroom. At first, the entire judging panel sat up straight, then slowly leaned in, then went completely silent. One judge murmured, this girl is doing what the entire Drift satellite research team couldn't. Bradley gripped his pen tightly. He was no longer smirking, no longer arrogant, just bewildered. 10 minutes remained in the competition. Kendra stepped back, reviewing her board. She didn't lift her chin, didn't wait for applause, didn't expect praise. She simply said quietly, I didn't come here to be right. I came to prove that the way we ask the question is wrong. The room remained silent, but this time no one dared to laugh, no one dared to dismiss her. Only one quiet question lingered in everyone's mind. If a 13-year-old girl can do that, how many talents have we overlooked simply because they didn't come from the right place? People often believe genius is innate, that it comes from a good environment, great teachers, famous schools, top-notch computers, advisors from elite universities. But they've never stepped into that tiny third-floor apartment in the old housing complex on the south side of Detroit, where Kendra grew up, where there was no private room, only a cracked bathroom mirror and countless equations written with a cheap marker. She didn't have a tutor, didn't have an iPad, only a sharp mind and the ache of missing her father. Kendra's father was once a satellite navigation data engineer for a private company. He had worked on the Drift 9 mission, the satellite project that failed due to an orbital miscalculation. Although he wasn't the one who made the error, he was the last person to sign off on the confirmation. 2 weeks later, he died. A car accident. The GPS gave incorrect directions. His car crashed into a construction zone. No one took responsibility. Only Kendra carried that burden in her heart for years afterward. She didn't talk about it, didn't cry much. She just quietly tried to understand why her father died, how a math problem could cost someone their life. She began to teach herself, not for grades, not for recognition, but because she wanted to understand, to rewrite what an entire system had failed at, the thing that kept her father from coming home. She once asked herself, if the center of gravity isn't fixed, what happens to the orbit? If the default model is wrong, would anyone dare rewrite the whole thing? The answer was no one. Until her. After the competition, a math professor sent Kendra's handwritten solution to an old friend, who was now working at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. In less than 30 minutes, he got a reply. This isn't just correct. It's what we missed. We shelved this problem 3 years ago, and now a 13-year-old has cracked it. And from that moment, everything changed. Not because she won, not because she became famous, but because, for the first time, the world had to face a truth. Intelligence doesn't come from privilege. It comes from pain, from quiet perseverance, from lonely nights writing equations on a mirror. To talk to her father, and if you ever saw that little girl standing quietly on stage, know that she wasn't just there to solve a math problem. She stood there to reclaim a forgotten truth, not a missing number, but the way this world measures a person's worth. Not long after that competition, a closed meeting was held at the City Board of Education. On the large screen was a scan of Kendra Johnson's handwritten solution. Standing before the screen was Professor Malcolm Reed, former advisor to NASA, a man who had taught orbital theory for more than 30 years. He pointed at the board and said, without hesitation, "This girl isn't just right. She rewrote the entire foundation of the problem. We thought we only needed to tweak the numbers, but she reversed the entire logical framework and did what NASA once thought impossible." No one could say a word. Someone in the council whispered, "But she's only 13. And then the impossible happened. NASA sent an invitation. It's not an honorary one, but an official invitation to the National Summer Research Camp, reserved for the youngest, most exceptional, rarest talents. We would like to invite your daughter to join the Drift 11 simulation group. Our engineers want to learn from her." Her mother couldn't believe what she was hearing. She stood silent for a few seconds, then asked, "Is there a tuition fee?" The person on the other end chuckled softly. "No, ma'am. She's already paid, with something money can't buy. The courage to ask questions adults don't dare to ask." And then, one by one, the people who once dismissed her began to taste the bitter flavor of silence. Bradley Weston, last year's winner, the one who mocked Kendra in the waiting room, sat quietly watching the morning news. Kendra Johnson, 8th grader, becomes the first person to redefine the satellite drift model that once baffled NASA. At Lincoln School, where she was once denied entry into the advanced math class, a small honor ceremony was held. The vice principal, the one who had signed the rejection letter, stood before the schoolyard, her voice trembling slightly. "We're sorry. We were wrong. And starting today, the school's special math program will be named Kendra, NASA, a technical conference room." On the whiteboard, there was a new name written in bold: the Johnson Realignment Model, applied to gravity drift prediction. An older engineer turned to his colleague and whispered, "That girl did what 27 PhDs never thought of." And all she had was a mirror, a marker, and a question no one dared to ask. That evening, in a small hotel room near NASA, Kendra stood before a large mirror. In her hand was a red marker, the old one she had used since 6th grade. She wrote a single line on the mirror: "Don't fix the frame. Redefine it." She didn't chant slogans, didn't post tearful videos, didn't write an open letter to the world. She just wrote on the same mirror that she had used her whole life to search for her father. And this time, when she looked into the mirror, Kendra no longer saw a child who had been rejected, but someone who had redefined her own worth. Not in a conference room, not on an honors board, not in front of dozens of cameras, but in a small community center room at the end of a housing block. A room Kendra used to visit whenever her mother worked night shifts. That room had now become the first classroom to bear her name. That afternoon, Kendra sat on an old carpet. In front of her were 6 young black girls. The youngest was just 8, the oldest 12. Each held a whiteboard. None had laptops. None wore fancy watches. Only eyes that sparkled with curiosity, as if they wanted to question the entire universe. "What do you see here?" She pointed to a model of curved space. No one answered. The room was quiet. Kendra smiled. She didn't pressure, didn't preach. She simply said, "Not knowing is also a smart beginning. Daring to ask is the first step of a genius." One little girl shyly asked, "Is this from NASA?" Kendra nodded. "Yeah, but I came up with it, right where you're sitting, in the place where no one thought I could understand." Oh, Mrs. Johnson stood silently by the door frame, her hands gently holding the edge. In her eyes was a kind of light only mothers who have been ignored by the world would understand. Pride but calm, joy but not surprise. We live in a world filled with noise. Everyone wants to speak. Everyone wants to prove they're right. Everyone wants to be recognized, to be seen. But there are minds that quietly observe, that patiently learn, and one day, when everyone else has given up, they ask a question that makes the whole world stop and listen. At NASA, a new honor board was mounted. A young engineer stopped in front of the new model display. Johnson realized